A medieval battlefield was one of the worst places a human could try to sleep. Temperatures could plunge below freezing, armor held cold against the skin, wind tore across open fields, fires drew enemy arrows, and the ground itself, frozen, wet, or churned to mud, drained heat faster than ice water. Hypothermia didn't just kill soldiers, it crippled armies. A single freezing night could destroy a campaign before dawn. And the reality is simple. A modern hiker with expensive winter gear could die in conditions medieval soldiers survived nightly. So how did they do it? How did knights sleep on frozen ground, under open sky, with no modern insulation, and survive long enough to fight at sunrise? The answer begins with mobility. Medieval warfare depended on armies that moved fast. Heavy tents slowed progress, consumed pack animals, and made forces predictable. So soldiers learned to engineer warmth from almost nothing. Their survival wasn't luck, but a refined system. Physics, materials, routine, and cooperation developed over centuries of war. The first rule was choosing the right place to lie down. Soldiers never slept in open wind if they could avoid it. They searched for natural insulation, tree lines, earth embankments, hedges, ruined farm walls, riverbanks, even abandoned siege ditches. Anything that broke the wind mattered more than anything that provided softness. Still air preserves heat. Moving air strips it away. A crude rise of earth could mean the difference between shivering and freezing. Written accounts from winter campaigns across Europe note how men marched well past nightfall just to find a ridge or hollow. These small depressions formed microclimates, pockets where wind skimmed overhead instead of sweeping through the camp. Temperatures inside could be several degrees warmer, not comfort, just survival. Once location was secured, the ground became the next threat. Bare earth pulls heat from the human body up to 20 times faster than cold air. Soldiers knew lying directly on soil, mud, frost, or snow was nearly as dangerous as lying in water, so they improvised insulation from whatever existed in the landscape. Bracken, reeds, pine boughs, heather, straw, brush, even grass stuffed into torn cloaks. Archaeological excavations of medieval encampment sites often reveal compacted vegetation layers beneath ash, evidence that insulating the ground was a priority before lighting any fire. This vegetation didn't need to be thick. Even a couple inches of dry or semi-dry plant matter slowed conductive heat loss dramatically. Air pockets in the material acted as natural insulation. A soldier's first bed was simply a barrier between his body and the earth. But insulation worked only if one other rule was obeyed. Never sleep wet. Moisture was the true killer. When clothing became damp, from rain, snow, or sweat, the cold accelerated dangerously. Soldiers removed armor immediately after marching to stop sweat from cooling against their skin. They hung cloaks inside shields to dry. They rubbed wool with fat or oil to make it shed water. They shook snow from garments constantly to stop it melting. These weren't superstitions, these were survival protocols. Fire, the obvious solution to cold, was complicated on a battlefield. Open flames exposed a camp's position. Smoke revealed numbers and direction. In many campaigns, open fire was forbidden entirely when enemy scouts were active. Soldiers turned instead to concealed heat. They dug long, low trenches filled with embers rather than flames. Dirt walls hid the glow from distant eyes. Buried coals radiated warmth for hours. In some armies, 2 shallow trenches were dug parallel, and men slept between them, forming a primitive radiant heating corridor. Observers from Eastern campaigns noted how steppe fighters survived nights that killed better-equipped foes because they mastered ember-based heating rather than flame-based light. Above the ground, clothing acted as a multi-layer thermal system. Wool formed the core because of its structure. Crimped fibers trap air, even when damp, creating natural insulation. Over that came cloaks, heavy, often double-layered, sometimes lined with fur. These cloaks were less garments than survival gear. Many weighed 6 to 8 pounds, ideal for trapping heat. Shields became part of the insulation toolkit. Soldiers propped them to block wind, leaned them against gear to create pockets of still air, and even used them as raised platforms to keep feet off frozen ground. Heated stones placed beneath a shield radiated warmth through the night. Crude, but effective. But even with insulation, moisture control, and concealed heat, one principle mattered more than all others. No one slept alone. A lone soldier lost heat rapidly. A pair, or a trio, or a tightly pressed group could share warmth and keep core temperature stable. Archaeological evidence from sleeping trenches shows spacing meant for multiple bodies, not individuals. Men slept back to back or side by side, cloaks pulled over all of them. The physics is simple. Shared body heat can raise the temperature of a confined space dramatically, even when outside air hovers near or below freezing. With a cloak stretched across the top, these shallow pits became human-heated survival shelters. Large armies scaled this idea. They formed windshield rings, circular arrangements of shields, packs, and spears around the men most exhausted from the march. Veterans often slept in the center, protected by younger or less fatigued soldiers on the perimeter. Cold became a resource managed collectively. Shelters were simple but effective. A cloak stretched between two spears formed a sloped roof. A shield propped at an angle became a wall. A shallow trench covered with a cloak became a tunnel of trapped warmth. Snow, surprisingly, became insulation when piled around the outside. A single sheet of canvas weighted with stones trapped enough warm air for sleep. By the 12th century, many soldiers carried felt-lined caps, mittens, and hose. These protected hands, feet, and ears, areas most vulnerable to dangerous heat loss. Some armies used sleeping hoods that covered neck, jaw, and throat, reducing heat escape from major blood vessels. These weren't luxuries. They were essential as weapons. But gear alone didn't keep armies alive. Routine did. Before sleeping, men dried what they could, massaged limbs to restore circulation, placed warmed stones near their feet, and ate hot broth. Warm food increased core temperature and reduced the risk of nighttime hypothermia. Squads rotated positions near embers or windbreaks. Footwear was dried by tucking it under tunics or between cloaks. Everything had a purpose. Commanders built these habits into discipline. More soldiers were lost to cold exposure than to swords on some campaigns. Leaders insisted on routines. Rotate out of wet clothing, avoid sweating before camp, sleep in clusters, shield fires, maintain a cold watch. A cold watch guard monitored men for signs of slowing speech or confusion, early warnings of hypothermia. Across Europe, regional traditions developed in response to climate. Scandinavian and Baltic fighters layered evergreen boughs because they resisted moisture. Steppe auxiliaries lined boots with felt stuffed with horsehair, creating exceptional insulation. English longbowmen slept with bows under their cloaks to keep the staves from freezing, accidentally warming themselves in the process. Swiss mercenaries carried small wool mats that acted as portable ground insulation during alpine nights. Even armies with different cultures converged on the same laws of cold survival, because physics doesn't change. Wind must be blocked, ground must be insulated, wetness must be prevented, heat must be shared, fire must be concealed, routine must be disciplined. Sleeping on a medieval battlefield wasn't one trick, it was a system. Location, insulation, moisture control, shared heat, hidden embers, compact shelters, and unbreakable nightly ritual. And it worked. The proof is simple. Armies marched through winters that should have destroyed them. They fought at dawn after nights that would cripple an untrained modern camper. They survived because their methods were refined, not primitive. Modern cold-weather military training teaches the same fundamentals. Ground insulation first, windbreak second. Stay dry, avoid sweating, eat before sleep. Use embers, not flames. Share warmth. Build low shelters. The materials have changed, synthetics instead of wool, metal stoves instead of embers, but the physics and survival logic remain identical. The medieval battlefield wasn't just a site of conflict. It was an environment that forced innovation.
Generations of soldiers learned to keep the human body alive under lethal conditions with almost no equipment and almost no margin for error. Stand on a winter field today, an empty plain where armies once shivered through the dark, and the silence hides a truth. Thousands survived nights that should have ended them, not through luck, but through discipline, cooperation, and an understanding of cold as precise as any modern manual. Medieval soldiers didn't sleep comfortably, they slept intelligently, and that intelligence kept armies alive long enough for history to survive the night.